everyone, and thank you for joining us today. So we are going to talk about a really exciting topic, and it's connected to reading, and it's connected to connections. You might have read our introduction to this webinar already. And let's just get started, I think, and I will just walk you through the topic and everything connected and our plan for today. So first of all, let me just tell you why we chose the topic of connections for today's webinar. First of all, it's a bit of a background information that I would like to share with you. Last year, we developed a series called Reading for the Environment with Maria Clary, who is the editor of the blog and also the series editor of Helbling Readers. And we realized that in every topic that we designed and developed for environmental teaching and to teach about the environment in its many aspects through seasons, through fashion and nature and tourism, we realized that everything is connected. And then we also noticed the need for making links with language education, because we cannot just treat English language classes in isolation, but we need to treat them more in connection with all the other disciplines and various topics that we touch upon. That's what English teachers do in any way. And there is another reason as well, which is probably a bit more poetic and more philosophical reason, and that's connected to how every work of art in the world is connected. And I think it is best summed up in this little quote by Virginia Woolf. She wrote this in her autobiographical book called Moments of Being. So just let me read it out to you. Behind a cotton wool is hidden a pattern that we, I mean all human beings, are connected with this, that the whole world is a work of art, that we are parts of the work of art. Now, it sounds really poetic, but at the same time, you will realize that it's really realistic and practical, because my idea is that through connections, through making connections visible between works of art, your students will realize that every text is connected. And by text, I mean music, film, graphic novels, comics. But these are connected through them because they are the readers and they create the creations and the connections, and they make these links. Somehow they build a little web around the text that they are reading. And if they are lucky, their web will meet other readers' webs. And that's how we can either go further and further and deeper into these connections. And of course, there's another reason, which is the traditional view from literary theory called intertextuality, which basically says, in a very simple way, we are all familiar with this, I think, that every word we use is a quotation from thousands of other texts. And realizing this, we also realize that the more you read, the more links we are going to make between texts. And there is one more reason, which we will discuss a little bit later, and that's connected to connecting links, skills actually in the language class, and how we talk about reading here, but you will see that we are covering all the 4 main skills and even more, but that we will talk about that a little bit later. So my question to you, why reading? So we could focus on listening or speaking, but why do you think reading is such a powerful field and activity that we really need to promote it and use it as a powerful resource? If you could just tell me in the chat box what you think, why you think reading is a really good tool for teaching. Just give me one good reason. As if I was a colleague, you had to convince about using reading more. I'd really love to see what you think about it. Why is reading so important? Bruce vocabulary, thank you. Very good point. It opens your mind, exactly. Context, very important again. Imagination. You can travel. I see beautiful answers are coming in, and I really hope to read all of your answers a bit later. Lovely, thank you. Yes, it's a new adventure. It's meaningful. People can also visualize and learn about cultures and inspiration. So let me show you what I have collected here about reading. You are already saying it. It inspires us to do things, to discover things. It also engages in dialogue. But how does it engage us in dialogue? It does it in two ways. First of all, you enter a dialogue with the text. And if you are interested in this, we have a series on the Readers Blog about reading strategies. And one topic is about interacting with texts. And it also helps you enter collaborative dialogues in the classroom, which I think is a really important option. Apart from monologic teaching, you can also do dialogic teaching. And I think students really appreciate that. Well, reading entertains. It's easy to know why. And it's also an investment in education. There was a really interesting idea, and I think it was by Alan Paverness in one of his lectures, in which he said that when we say that spending too much time on reading in the classroom takes valuable time away from our lessons, we are just thinking, wrong way, because that's false economy. Actually, if you show your students that reading is something that should be part of every lesson, or at least every other lesson, and even extensive reading or reading for fun, you will teach them and show them that reading is a valuable activity that they should do if they want to learn the language. Reading also helps you focus, and I think it's important that students learn to slow down a little and concentrate on texts. And I think that through activities, language activities, you can help them do that in and out of the classroom. It gives you materials for learning. It builds vocabulary in unexpected ways sometimes, because I think we could all just say and share a couple of words that we learned from certain novels and stories, and we still remember the context in which we saw that piece of word and text. And it also, somebody asked, you have or mentioned it, that it puts real language in context. And that's very important, because sometimes language books treat English language in decontextualized ways. And I don't know if you ever get this from students, but I often get questions like, oh, what does this word mean? How do you say this sentence in English? And I always say to them, I can't translate sentences and words without knowing the context. And that's exactly what happens with stories. You will immediately have the context, and that's really, really cool. It also offers topics for discussions, like you are not just talking about the book, you are talking about a lot more as well. And it gives opportunities for research projects. And we will talk about that a little bit more when we talk about disciplinary links and building projects like that. So what can you read in the classroom? You can read anything practically. I always tell my own students that as long as they are reading and reflecting on their own reading, I don't really mind what kind of text they bring in the classroom. So you can read stories, nonfiction, magazine, journals, books, comics, picture books, graphic novels, screen and print-based materials. Of course, they require different reading strategies and skills, but it's really important to mix both screen and print-based reading. And I don't know how much you know about the Helbling Readers series, but in the Red series especially, which is for A1 to A2 levels, elementary levels, and teenagers, you will have fiction, original stories, graphic novels, and you will also have interactive adventure stories, and you will have graphic stories, as I said, and short readers. So in the blue readers, which is a bit higher level, B1, A2 to B1, you will get classic and fiction stories. We also have a Shakespeare series where you get drama. And so you can really discover all these different kinds of readers on our website. Now, why did we choose literature as the focus of our talk today? It's not just because we believe in the power of stories, but that's because that's how human beings make sense of the world. That's how you organize time, and that's how you reflect on your experiences. Stories are the most powerful in a way because we learn through stories from our childhood. since the moment you were born, you are experiencing and being taught stories. So that's a natural way of learning. It also helps you have fun. And it's both informal and formal learning, because of course, through reading, you learn even unknowingly about a lot of things. But it's also formal because with disciplinary education, and as you progress in the school, you will have to read academic texts, scientific articles. So by introducing good reading strategies early on, and I think intervention or this kind of focused teaching should start even in the nursery or even in primary school. And because if you don't have those good basics, it's really hard to then expect students to read scientific texts later on. So it also helps you with formal learning. And of course, stories help you build connections with other texts and themes and people. So if you spend time with a story and you use it in your teaching, you will see all the powerful outcomes narratives and literature will have. So I've collected different aspects of how connections can be addressed in the classroom. We have this lovely, lovely illustration by Viola Nicolai from one of our readers. And I have connected one thing here, skills. But by skills, we shouldn't just think of in terms of reading, writing, speaking, and listening skills. But skills should be addressed at the level of literacy. And literacy is something that happens on a climb. So it's a developmental skill. Being able to write your name is a certain literacy level, and being able to read The Heart of Darkness is a higher kind of literacy skill. And of course, we want to help our students progress on this developmental ladder. We are also connecting thinking and reflection. We sometimes think that, okay, we can all think, and students are always expected to reflect on their reading experiences. But reflection is one of the most difficult skills, really, that students need to demonstrate. And when we read and when we do a lot of reading together, we can really help them with that. And that's where they will be judged also in the future. We all have to write reflective essays, and when you apply for a job, you have to do that. So it's also a very practical task that you are doing. And of course, we are integrating digital skills. You cannot do a lesson or a course without digital skills development. And the kind of digital fallacy that all students have excellent digital skills, I think we all know that it's kind of true, but not really true, because students are able to use their phones really well and they are hooked on their phones, but they are not always excellent users of digital platforms. And I think that if you help them with practicing on digital environments, in a safe environment, you can really help them improve excellent digital skills. So another area of making connections is connecting knowledge. And by knowledge, we also mean knowledge about language and language knowledge in general. And generally, we say that, okay, to know a language means that you know its grammar and you know its vocabulary, but it's also about knowing about the context, the use of expressions, how are they used in certain contexts. So that sort of deeper knowledge is the really practical knowledge that you can only really get through dialogues and real authentic materials and stories. And it's the same for disciplinary connections. So we can't treat subjects in isolation. We want to connect them through stories and through texts. And finally, I think the most beautiful aspect of making connections is connecting people. And we do that through helping students grow emotionally through stories, and also they develop social responsibility. They see social issues, and they experience things that we wouldn't normally want them to experience in real life, maybe, but they can see things in stories. And I think that's a beautiful aspect of making connections. Now, I will show you 5 aspects. I've selected 5 aspects of connections. So what are we connecting? And then we will get to some practical ideas as well. When you are making connections, as it's the same with literacy development. Connecting is a learning process. So it's not necessarily in the order, like we put them on these steps, but first you start with the text, and then you link the text and link it with your own personal experiences. It's not because we are egocentric, it's because that's how we are. We first observe things through our eyes and through our own experiences. And of course, we want students to kind of distance themselves from doing that too much in the classroom, because we also want them to be objective and process information in a factual way. And then we also connect that text from different cultures, compare them, realize that, oh, we are very different, but at the same time, we are all very similar. Another aspect of connections and in terms of learning is spoken and written texts. We tend to assume that spoken language is simple, but on the level of sentences and how we put together ideas, spoken language is more complex, because in writing we need to be really clear and straightforward. So writing is often more organized, but the differences are there. They are two different ways of communicating, of course. So students, as they learn, they realize that. And I think they really need to realize that, because I observed that, noticed that students like to write the way they speak, and that can lead to confusion. Of course, when you are learning to read, you have lots of visual information on websites, in illustrated books, in magazines. So you need to make meaning between visual and verbal text. And wonderful things can happen when two different modes of meaning may meet. And sometimes they are the same, sometimes they converge, sometimes they diverge. But I think it's again an important skill to notice different meanings. The language of text. It's first of all, of course, lexical knowledge. You need to understand the words you are reading, but it's also how texts are organized. What kind of genres are there? What is the structure of the typical romantic novel? Or at a later stage, students will want to know what's the typical structure of an argumentative essay. So when we talk about this learning process, it applies to academic learning as well, of course. Information and ideas. You need to link factual information and your own ideas or other people's ideas. Intertextuality happens through linking more and more texts, making connections between your favorite film and its adaptations, or a story from Greek mythology, and then you realize that most of the films use the same basic stories from mythology or legends. So making these links is, again, kind of an exciting experience for students. Then you learn to link different perspectives, and you, at a very high level, you can make complex meanings in context. So connection doesn't happen overnight. It happens over years, connecting text and connecting knowledge. But we can help students do that. Now, when we connect skills, I use this example from 5 Children and It, a beautiful story by Edith Nesbit. And this one is in the first chapter, or no, it's kind of in the middle of the book. I use this because I really love the illustration here again. So when we look at just a double page, it could be from a magazine or in a graded reader or even in your course book. You see the image first. I assume that students are usually drawn to the image first. So they look at the image and they have to read the text. But as they read, you usually have the option to also listen. And you have to listen to other people talk about it. And then you will have to say something about it, and you can encourage students to write about their experiences. So skills shouldn't be treated in isolation, but they should always be treated in connection. Another idea is literacy skills, that all these different aspects of skills of viewing and thinking and reading, listening and speaking and writing, they all contribute to literacy skills. and also learning about the background knowledge and context, they also contribute to developing literacy skills. Then you have to learn to view. As I said, students can be asked to find the references in the text to the image, or they can just simply interpret the image, describe the image without reading the text. In any case, you need to learn to view images, and you can help students do that. Again, thinking and reflection are important skills. If you see this little box here, well, in the reader I chose, and in all readers, you get these reflection boxes with comprehension or reflection questions, and these really help the students work with the text in a kind of philosophical or even just more reflective way, advanced way. And these questions will also engage students in terms of sharing their emotional response or like here, feelings. So if you don't have the chance to work on your own questions, if you use these readers, you will have these questions, so you wouldn't have to worry about those. Multimodal literacy is a bit different from just literacy in its traditional sense, because multimodal literacy will include making meaning with images and the design of the book. So for example, here you see the text, and the text is the actual story is above and under the box, but you have a little box with a line around it, and that's a visual addition. And then you have some words with a red dot, and those words are the difficult words which are glossed at the bottom of the page. So all this tiny bit of visual information helps students deal with complex texts. And finally, digital literacy. You can also do screen-based reading, which will require students to read actually in a different direction, maybe in a faster way. Sometimes they read, or not in such a detailed way. And if you use the Helbling eZone digital platform, then you will have lots of exercises where they can practice their digital skills. Well, what else? We have another aspect of making connections, and that is connecting layers of language. This idea comes actually from the functional theory of language by Halliday, Hassan, and Martin. And this is a very simplified but really practical adaptation of the model, which puts every single text in the larger context of culture and genre. And if you do this approach, and if you follow this approach, you will approach text not at word level first, but you will go from like, let's go and build background knowledge first. You build background knowledge, you talk about the culture, the author, the historical context, cultural references, the time of the novel, which will help students really place this text in the right time and place. Also, when you tell your students that, okay, we are going to read a detective story, they will have expectations, and these genre expectations will need to be met, or maybe these expectations are not really the way these don't really happen the way students want them to happen. But going into with such activated knowledge helps students with comprehension. Then you can focus on the text, and then you zoom in on the sentence and the words. I tell my students to think of this as layers of an onion. So you peel the different layers, and you go deeper and deeper and deeper, and you arrive at words. When you arrive at a word through this approach, it will be easier to remember its meaning. And you are also, as I mentioned several times before, you are connecting disciplines. The two chosen titles for today are The Age of Innocence and 5 Children and It. And if you just think of The Age of Innocence, you will find historical links with cultural history, geography, language use, social issues. We will discuss these a bit later. And then when you have 5 Children and It, it's a lower level story. You can talk about summer holidays, but you can still talk about history, social issues, cultural history, and magic. And finally, we said we are the most beautiful part of making connections is connecting people. So I mentioned this before. There are a lot of stories in which we read about experiences that are best not experienced in real life, or we experience them in real life, but we find it hard to talk about those experiences. But through stories, we can really approach them in a meaningful way and in a kind of helpful way. So stories will help build empathy. You can experience different lives, and you can also just learn about different acts of kindness. In terms of social responsibility, what happens? You give a voice to invisible people. You will see hidden messages. There will be untold stories that can be told and heard. And there can be difficult topics addressed and discussed in the classroom through stories, things that you wouldn't normally talk about. And I think that that's a beautiful aspect of how connections work. I will let you just read this quote from Neil Gaiman. I think that this one quote really brings all these aspects of how literature transforms you and how it helps you experience new things in a beautiful perspective. I'll just give you one moment to read it, and then we'll move on. So you are being someone else, and when you return to your own world, you're going to be slightly changed, he says. And I hope that really happens every time we read a story. So now we will turn to more practical ideas. And it's really good to know all these different approaches and all these different ideas in connection with connections. But how can you actually work with these in the classroom? I say that we should start speaking first. You can start by initiating discussions about the cover. You pick a book. If it has a nice cover, you can talk about the cover. If you pick a book, but you pick different editions, you might notice that the different editions will have different covers. And my students always find it fascinating to compare the covers of the same book for different audiences. That's a fun exercise that you can try yourself. Or you can just take the cover of a book, look at it, and ask the students how it makes them feel. Like, I have this book here, and what they can see, they can describe it and reflect on their emotional response. Then you can use some time to build background knowledge. We sometimes say that we are activating background knowledge, but that's not a really democratic way of thinking about it, because we can't assume that everybody will have the same amount of background knowledge. So we need to have students build that knowledge, and we need to share some background information with everyone. You can also ask students to predict what might happen in the story. I think that doing guided reading is really important. And guided reading practically means that you help students make meaning with the text. So at the higher or broader level, you can just highlight descriptive passages. You can talk about dialogues, how they work, or narrative passages. And then you can ask comprehension questions, talk about difficult and implied meanings. So doing some reading like this in the classroom will really help students feel more confident to read on their own, I think, because you can really show them different reading strategies that they can use themselves. Reading out loud is something that used to be not in fashion, but as I see it, there are excellent ways of doing reading out loud, even dramatization in the classroom. And I'm really happy to see that more and more teachers are doing it again, but not in a boring way, like one student reads a sentence and then another one reads another one, but in more creative ways. And that can really help, again, students with intonation and actually just interpretation of meanings, because when they really understand what they read out loud, they will really understand what the text is about, and you can help them with that. You can connect skills in the classroom simply by listening to the audio recordings. Like the readers we offer have MP3 recordings, and I really love that because they are slow enough to follow, and but also original enough to enjoy at the same time. Writing can happen in different ways. You can do the traditional language practice exercises, which are usually built around texts, or you can initiate project writing sessions where students can come up with creating even a poster presentation, or they can decide to write a guide to books. So there can be all sorts of projects that you can think of. There can be reading diaries that students write, creative writing sessions, and note-taking. If you're interested in these aspects, it would be really hard to explain all of this, but if you go on our blog, you will see different writing projects that other teachers have already done, or writing exercises that you can do with your students. Viewing illustrations, again, is an important thing. We talked about that before, and reflecting on text. And that's another aspect that we mentioned before. Now, how can you connect text with experience? First, simply ask the students to read a passage. Then they should be able to summarize the events objectively. And I think this step is really important because this is how they learn what the difference between a summary and reflection or evaluation of a text. They just need to summarize what happened without any comments or interpretation, really. Then they can focus on the main issues addressed in the passage, and you can help them with that, but I think they will notice that on their own. They can describe how people are feeling. You can ask questions regarding how do you think they feel in that situation and how you would feel in that situation. You can ask students to find similar scenes in other stories. I'm sure that any scene they read, or any event they read about in a story will remind them of a scene in a film, or a song, or in an artwork, so they can make these links. Sometimes students notice more than we do, I think, and that's really exciting. They can then reflect on how different stories approach the same topic. Maybe there are different answers to the same question. And then you can talk about what they learned from the behavior of the characters. So this is just connecting text and experience. And as we said before, you can go from top down. It's another practical way of approaching stories. Talk about the context of the story, explore the structure of the text, focus on descriptions and dialogues, and then go and talk about sentences and words in context. And you will see this in a moment in a real example. First, we talk about how you could get started in class with through 5 children it, and then the projects you could build around the Age of Innocence. So our approach is zooming in on the first chapter, but we don't start with reading the first chapter. We start with the context, cultural and historical, then we use the images, and we land on the first chapter in a guided reading lesson. So it's Edwardian era, and we talk about the summer holidays first. So you can just explore the historical context, and you can also talk about what summer holidays are like, what summer holidays could be in the city and in the countryside, or on the beach, or in the mountains, and what they would normally do. Then I suggest you focus on the chapter headings, so students can predict what might happen in the chapters. And in this case, you will see that in the first chapter called It, we are setting the scene, and you will meet the new characters, and you focus on that. And then you read the first dialogues, and you will learn new words. So if we start with the first illustration, Who are the 5 children, you might ask? Who is it? What does it look like? And this is my question to you. What does it look like, this little fairy? Do you think he's a friendly character? Do you think he's a happy character, a friendly character, or what kind of qualities would you? How would you describe it? Just trying to see your answers. Friendly, imaginary, ugly, friendly and smart. And what kind of animal does it remind you of? Look at the way he's walking off. Yes, I agree. Looks like a monster. Relax. Yeah. He is a hipster kind of guy, right? Cool looking guy. Serious and okay, that's brilliant. Yeah, those are really creative ideas. I love them. Thank you. So I think that it's just using him or it as an example is a really good way to start a lesson, because students will love this character. And then you can focus on the content. So how many chapters are there? You can just count, because we have excellent ability. So we have 10 chapters, and students can guess what all these chapters might be about once you actually share some basic information about the story with them. I think it's up to you if you want to read about the author or not. There are two ways of approaching it. Some people want to know about the author, and some people say that no, the author is dead. We don't want to know anything about the author. But I think that from a historical and cultural perspective, it's wonderful to find out about the author, and students love to do that. These texts here are written at the reading level of the story, so students should be able to read it on their own. And that there are hard words, for example, you will see there are red dots, and those are explained at the bottom of the page. And then you have some general information about the book, which will really help you introduce the topic. So all this kind of peeling the onion and getting to the text and arriving at the level of the chapters is done for you here. So you wouldn't have to really do any background work. You can just read these pages, and then you can just read about, here you can read about the boardings and their meals, party time, and so on. So who were there, when did they live, what meals did they have every day? That's things that you can discuss, and students wouldn't normally know about these things. So I think they would enjoy learning about it. And then, just like when you read drama or a play and you have all the characters introduced to you, here I think it's a good idea to introduce the characters, so you can make friends immediately with some of the characters, and I would make friends with it. And you can guess the relationship between between all these people. And then we arrive at the very first illustration. And even without looking at text, we can start setting up the context here and the actual place of the first chapter. So where do you think they are? Which season is it? How do you know that we are at the beginning of the last century? And give 3 reasons for spending the holidays in the countryside. So students might tell you that, okay, it's the summer because everything is very green and there are different shades of green, and I can't see any big houses. There's only one house, so it must be the countryside. And we know that we are in the past because there's this old carriage, and these different aspects, pieces of information really help you put this all together. And then we are here and we have the text. So first you can just listen and read. I think it's nice to slow down at this point and just play the recording to the students. And I try to play this for you, sharing sound. So I will just let you listen for a moment to the first paragraph, and then we will talk about what you can do with the text.
Page 17. Chapter 1. It. London is a very boring place for children in the summer holidays. It isn't like the country. There are no green fields to play in. And it isn't like the beach. There's no sand or water to play with. Mother and father want to take their 5 children to the country this year. Mother finds a nice house near a town called Rochester. It's a long way from London. First, they must take a train to Rochester, and then a carriage to the house.
All right. I hope you heard the recording. I shared my sound, so it should have worked. So here, you just give 5 or 10 minutes to reading, and I think we could be happy if students do that much reading in a week in English. So I really love to slow down and just enjoy the story, whatever story we are reading, for a few minutes. And students, even if they haven't read the story before, or they never really read in English, they will have the chance to really follow the beautiful pronunciation of the narrator and then just focus on the text. And I think that then you can give them some time to ask you about any questions they have immediately. They can try to read the text out loud as well, in pairs, maybe. You can talk about the difficult words. But first you are just focusing on the text, and you can even look at the illustration and find links. So you can just say, what do you see? There are green fields, and so there are no green fields in London, but there are green fields in the picture, and so on. So you can just make this kind of visual verbal comparison we talked about in connection before. From there, you can start focusing more on the text. So for example, this paragraph here is about the moment when they arrive at the house. The children don't wait for mother, they jump out and run into the garden. So we talk about the garden here, and you can show your students that, because maybe at this level, it's an A1 to A2 level, they don't really know how to put longer text together and analyze these texts. So you can say, now we talk about the garden. What do you learn about the garden? It's big and there are a lot of fruit trees and flowers, and you can start actually imagining it, what it looks like. You already had the first input from the illustration. And then from there you go, the garden has 3 fruit trees. What sort of fruit trees does it have? It has plum trees, and so on. From the garden, they can see that some houses and farms at the bottom of the hill. So thank God they are not totally isolated, but they are far away enough from people. So there's a wood, and there's a big sand pit, and everything is new and everything is exciting. So it's like some kind of tension is growing, and then we see that something really happy is going to happen, or not, who knows. Of course, you will have new words. The pictures and the glossary at the bottom of the page will help you with that, so students should be able to deal with the new words alone, but you can always ask them the meaning of the words, and they could either use the example sentences from the text they have just read, or come up with their own sentences for, like, a wood. Robin Hood lives in a wood, and so on. And then from there, we carry on with the text. And as I said, we are going deeper into the text, and we are focusing on how language works here, and we are making links. So we know that we are in a new exciting place, and something exciting and unexpected happens. And you can ask students, like, how do you know from the text? How does the text make you understand that something is meaningful is happening here? Because you have words that signal this new event, suddenly, jump back, in surprise. So all these words are really building up a colorful, new, happy story or exciting story. And then you have the description of it. And students will have new words here. So maybe they already described it in their own way, but now they have the official description. 2 long horns, its eyes are on the end of them, it has big ears and a fat body covered in fur, its hands and feet are like a monkey's hands and feet. And that's how you just carry on with the first chapter, and you are at the end of the first chapter. So I think you have spent by this maybe 2 45-minute lessons on building up the first, reading the first chapter, and then you can just dedicate another lesson to working more closely with the text, doing some exercises or just talking about it. Recently, I have seen a film adaptation of this story, so maybe you want to use that as well in your lesson. And then you're there, and then you can decide, depending on how you approach reading, whether you want to read from week to week or lesson to lesson, or you want to use just a couple of lessons to help students get started, because then they can start reading the second chapter at home, and then you can discuss it and then go on and on and on. There are different ways of integrating reading in your courses. So that's how you can get started. Here again, you will have questions that help you understand fairies, for example, here. And you can talk a bit more about it with Samuel. All right. And now we can talk a little bit. We don't have that much time, but I'd like to really talk about the book, The Age of Innocence. I'm really happy about this book because it's one of my favorite novels, and I also did the adaptation for this book here. I don't know if you have seen the film adaptation by Martin Scorsese, but it's one of the most beautiful film adaptations, I think, film adaptations, and it's also really detailed and really true to the text. So here, I'm not really focusing on the language of the book that much, but I will show you how you can connect different disciplines and make intertextual links with other texts. So The Age of Innocence is set in New York at the end of the 19th century, around the 1870s. So you already have 2 historical links here. You can talk about the Gilded Age, or the New York families and business that was growing in New York in that age. You can talk about what gilded means and how it's different from gold or golden age. You can talk about New York society in the 1800s and show people how New York was a growing city and how it was still in development. If you go on YouTube, you will find wonderful videos of showing New York at the turn of the century. So it's a really fascinating history project for students, and that's one way of learning about the culture of New York. And I think every student will want to learn about New York. And then you have the social issues, marriages and arranged marriages. It's a kind of difficult topic. As I said, difficult topics are addressed in books, and I'm not sure anyone would really like to talk about divorce and marriages. But what you can do, you can use a book to address these topics, because these topics really interest students, but we don't know how to talk about them. And I don't really like asking students for their own experiences, because sometimes I feel it would be unethical to do that, and they would feel shy, or it would really just make them feel bad sometimes in a way. But if you talk about it through the story, it can be actually really empowering way of addressing these issues. And it talks about personal freedom as well, and in a beautiful way. And in terms of communication, that's a fun way to learn more about the context. There are lots of flowers in the book and letters and telegrams, and we will talk a little bit about that now. So there is this one scene with this wonderful illustration I love so much. Newland Archer here, the main character, goes into the florist's shop and wants to buy flowers. So buying flowers and sending flowers was more like a kind of communicative and social act that carried a lot of meaning in the past. Not anymore. or not as much as it used to, unfortunately, maybe. So here you have, I have highlighted all these references to flowers, like he's sending May, his fiance, her daily box of lilies of the valley. And then you have a new word like cluster of yellow roses. And the flowers came late. So yesterday they came late. So actually he really spends the flowers every day. So he sent some flowers to Countess Olenska, and they talk about the nice flowers. So here it's a beautiful moment, I think, and you can ask students to reflect on, like, do you send flowers to people? When was the last time you bought flowers? And what kind of flower would you buy to your mom, your best friend, for what occasion? And you can also talk about the symbolism of flowers, which can be very different in different cultures. What does the color red or white or yellow mean? Maybe there are some conventions that we don't know about or you want to share. So talk about that. This is a really nice way of introducing how communication can work and how it still works, but we don't do it that often. Then you have letters and telegrams, and then it's a really nice game to play. Like, how would your life be if you had to send letters and telegrams, handwritten messages? So there's a lot of letter writing in the book. So what you're doing, you are reading for reflection as well, as we said before. Reflection is a still complex skill. As I said, it needs to be scaffolded and guided and modeled. When you are doing reflection, you are integrating lots of other skills, and that's a way of connecting things. So you are reading first, you are remembering, you are summarizing, you are interpreting and analyzing what is written. So if you do all these things in the classroom, you are really like building towards reflective skills. You have to learn to base your judgment on facts and make links with other text experiences. And most importantly, a lot of things are only implied and some need to be put in context, and that's what happens here. So we are in the honeymoon chapter here. So Newland Archer and now his wife may go on their honeymoon, a 3-month honeymoon to Europe. So you can talk about how lucky they were. But there's something going on, like here during the honeymoon, Archer had lost his enthusiasm about marriage. We don't really know why, so you have to guess. The same way as all his friends treated their wives. Again, implied meanings. How do they treat their wives? And whatever can happen, she should always be loyal to him. So you can really talk about what these hidden meanings mean, and you can make them explicit through discussion. So that's one way of really getting into debates even about the text. And finally, when you're reading, you are making links with other texts. The Age of Innocence is a great text for this as well. So first of all, it's setting New York in the late 1800s. I don't know if you've seen the series The Gilded Age. It went on one of the main channels recently. And it has the same setting, and it shows different families in New York and how they are interacting and what their conventions are and so on. So check it out. That's, again, a nice link. You can talk about the larger theme of love and marriage. And you can make links to British literature, Jane Austen. If you talk about society, you can read Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. You will find all these books in our series. And then if you talk about personal freedom, you can make a connection with Jane Eyre and Charlotte Bronte. So connections can work on the level of words. Even a quote can make you think of a connection, or the setting can make you think, or a street, or a symbol, or any kind of motive. And then the themes of the story can also have you make these links. So that's all I wanted to say, and I have time to say about the Age of Innocence. If you're interested, go on our blog and check out our lesson plans about the Age of Innocence, because we discover more and more of these projects that you can describe, more projects that you can do. And finally, let me just tell you about the digital skills. it's hard to imagine how you can develop them without actual platforms where you can work. So if you go on Helbling Readers, you will find opportunities for skills development. The most important aspects of this platform is that it gives you ongoing language practice with scaffolded activities for reading comprehension, vocab practice, listening, language use, and idiom style activities as well. You, the teacher, can control the learning environment, and most importantly, it's self-correcting. I don't know about you, but I spend lots of nights correcting essays and tests, and it makes me more than tired. So if I had a chance to use a platform where I get the text corrected and I can only check the mistakes, that would save me a lot of time, and I would be really happy. So let me show you a couple of screenshots from this. So here, for example, for 5 children, it and the Age of Innocence, I created a classroom with some material, these 2 materials. You get the overview of what's available, the audio, cyber homework, and downloads. You need an activation code you will find in the book, and once you have entered the code, you can download the full recording in MP3 and the audio for the exercises. You will have exercises for cyber homework for characters and comprehension exercises, and you have vocab. For example, this is a lower level one for A1, so you have a lot of image-based activities. Here again, a comprehension one. For the Age of Innocence, we have the same structure always, but here you have like 2 or 4, so it's a B1 level book. And you can always check out the levels of the readers at the back, on the back of the book. Here I have a beautiful illustration with multiple choice close exercise. So this is the kind of material you find on eZen. I recommend that you check that out as well. Also, I'd like you to go on the Helbling Readers Blog. You can subscribe to our newsletter. And things that I described here, we also write about these ideas on the blog. So you see that our latest blogs were about building background knowledge, experiences, and abstract concepts, how to ask questions from the text, reading, thinking, and well-being, interactive adventures, how to get interactive with a story. So check it out. We have weekly posts with lesson plans, reading projects, methodology, lookup materials you can download, quizzes, interviews with authors, interviews with teachers who share their reading experiences with really cool ideas. And right now we have 2 series running, one for about reading strategies, and the other one I mentioned, reading making connections, but we had last year reading for the environment and a quick guide, for example, to children's literature, but you will find a lot more. And I think that's all we have time for today. I hope that you found the webinar useful. I know there's a lot to digest, but you can always check out the recording again, and you will see the slides, and you can go back and think about the webinar again. So thank you again for joining us, and please check out the blog. And I really appreciate that you gave us this hour from your evening today, so or your day, wherever you are in the world. So I wish you a really good day and evening, and I hope to see you later or at another time during another webinar. Bye-bye.